was it like growing up in Paint Creek, Texas?
Well, let me geographically kind of pinpoint that for you, because it actually wasn't even on a map until I got to be the governor of Texas in 2000. And now it's, if you go down the eastern panhandle of Texas and hit the Red River and count 4 counties down, and those are each about 30 miles in width there. So about 120 miles or so. And that is, if you looked at the Texas map, you'd call it north central Texas. Now, everything west of Fort Worth is referred to as West Texas, of course, but 200 miles west of Fort Worth, and 60 miles north of Abilene, 16 miles from the closest place that had a post office was the little community of Paint Creek, and we lived about, probably 4 or 5 miles away from the actual school that would pinpoint what would be called the community of Paint Creek. There was no entity there other than a school and 2 churches, a Methodist and a Baptist, your choice. So that is where Paint Creek was, and it was very close-knit, very small number of people. I want to say 110, 120 kids, grades 1 through 12, Methodist church, Baptist church, as I shared with you, and I'll give you an example of some of the teachers lived around the school. Boy Scouts in school was kind of what my life was, and 4-H, showing club cabs. That was in the 50s. I was born in 1950, of course, so the late 50s and 60s were there in Paint Creek. So Boy Scouts, working towards getting an Eagle Scout.
Which you did in your teens.
I did in 1964. And actually it was one of the first times I ever left Texas to go to any place of note. And the National Jamboree was in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania at that particular point in time. I think around 40,000 Boy Scouts from across America came together, and one of the first, if not the first times I was ever on a commercial airline was as we flew out of there and went to Philadelphia, went to see the Liberty Bell, and we went to Washington to meet our congressman. And if you'll recall, in 1960, you may not even have been born in 1964, but the World's Fair was going on in New York City, and we took a side trip up there. So that was quite a eye-opener for a young boy who grew up in Paint Creek, Texas. So,
quite a first trip out of the state.
Yeah, and so that kind of gives you a little blush of my life was very quiet, very pedestrian, very monolithic from the standpoint of the people I was around, and my world really didn't change a lot until 1973, and I went after college, became a pilot in the Air Force, and then I kind of went from pedestrian to Mach 1.2, and literally and figuratively from the standpoint of living all over the world. And being exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot of different governments, a lot of different people. And as a 25, 26-year-old man is when I went through a really maturing process of understanding what a great country America is, because I left and I got to go see what other people go through, how they live, the freedoms they don't have, and what we all too often take for granted. And other people around the world. You, of course, having grown up in another country, you've had that opportunity as well to understand the power of the freedoms of America.
The greatest country on the face of the earth. I want to stay in Paint Creek for a while, though, because I want to explore some of these things. You grew up, your mom and dad were Ray and Amelia. They were tenant farmers originally. Yeah,
and that's a sharecropper. What I found out, my wife told me the other day, she said, I was in Iowa and I used the word tenant farmer, and somebody looked at me odd, and she explained what it is, and they went, "Oh, sharecropper."
There you go. But you first 5 years of your life, no indoor plumbing, clothes made by your mom.
Yeah, my mom made my clothes up to including when I went off to college, so that wasn't. My mother's and still is a great seamstress and quite a talented quilter.
Were you aware that you were growing up in a family that wouldn't be classed as rich by any standards whatsoever?
Not really.
No?
We had everything we needed. I had a Shetland pony and a dog, and we raised our. We milked our cows. We had chickens and fresh eggs and a garden during the summer months, and my mom canned, and so we had everything that we needed. So I wouldn't. And if you ask me today, were you poor? No. As a matter of fact, I would consider myself to be rich, not in material things, but in the great family and the community I lived in and faith. Not at all poor.
Okay. Well, I promised you we're going to get to the issues. I just want to deal with a couple more things.
I'm yours for the afternoon. I'm
getting to know you and getting to know how you arrived at this point in your life. I think it's important to visit the past. Now, your dad, of course.
I can answer that one for you. It's by the grace of God, and he does have quite a sense of humor.
Oh, trust me, he was looking out for me last night. I promise you. Your dad was a tail gunner in World War II. He flew 35 missions over Europe, which is a lot to have survived. Did he talk much about his service in the war when you were growing up?
My dad didn't. There was a shoe box that had a great deal of his memorabilia in it. Each of his missions, he took a little tag off of each bomb and wrote where the mission went, what the conditions were, what the flak was like, what the fighters were like, and the date of the mission, and he kept all of those along with his medals and what have you. And my mom here within the last 10 years put it into a scrapbook, and it's quite a impressive collection. But Dad just wanted to come home and live in peace and farm that small little piece of earth that he rented, and his buddies would come from time to time to visit him. We would go. I remember one summer when the crops were laid by, we went to Aurora, Nebraska, to visit with Sandy Denson, who was one of his crew members, and I still keep up with the girls. Dad's the only one of the crew still left alive. I had them back in 2000, I believe, in 1 to the governor's mansion after I was elected governor, and the memory serves me correctly, I think 3 or 4 of his crew are still alive, and now they've all passed with the exception of Dad. So when they would show up, I would stand on the side of the circle and listen, and they would talk about their old days of flying and what have you. But other than that, no, there was
so many who took part in that war don't want to talk about what they went through. It's
Dad was 19.
They were an incredible generation.
I think about being 19 years old and being in the tail, which is probably one of the more dangerous spots. And in 1944, your chances were a little better than in 1943. But I want to say a third of the crews never were. Not good odds. As a matter of fact, I think it was the most dangerous job in the military, even more so than being an infantryman in the Pacific. Was being a 8th Air Force crew member.
It was.
They were something.
To have flown 35 missions over Europe was quite something. Let me ask you this: do you remember? And you'll be in trouble if you don't answer this the right way. Do you remember the first time you laid eyes on Anita?
I do, and it wasn't that I was particularly paying attention to her. And we argue still, and it doesn't matter whether it was I was 10 and she was 8, or I was 8 and she was 6. It was we both were. My mother thought it important for us to learn how to play the piano. So once a week, my mom would drive us in the 16 miles into town, and I took piano lessons. And Anita and I actually sat by each other in the late 50s at a piano recital. And I'm sure I was not happy because I had to sit by a girl. And then the next time I remember seeing her was in 1966. And she had changed in a wonderful way and become a beautiful young lady. And that was when I asked her, well, it wasn't later in that summer, I asked her out on our first date in August.
Took a few months to get the courage.
Yeah, and then it was 16 years later before she ever agreed to marry me. So it was we had a wonderful courtship. It was lengthy, and a lot of times
because you've been
long
married
distance.
a long. You've been married a long
29
time.
years.
Right, you've been married.
Yeah,
29
so 45
years
we've been either dating or married. She is an incredible lady. I know you all, and a lot of people in Iowa have gotten to see her and know her. And her, a great heart, a great mother, wonderful wife, and my best friend.
Can't be bad. Well,
No.
I don't think you're in trouble after that. What would you say was the greatest moment of joy in your life, sir?
The first time that doctor handed Griffin Perry to me, and let me share with you why. Not just because he was our firstborn, but Nita was in labor for 40 hours.
Wow.
And her dad's a physician. She was the director of nurses at the hospital. We were living in the little town of Haskell, which was where she grew up, and population 3,500 to 4,000. And so she had a very difficult delivery, and it was a weekend, and the anesthesiologist couldn't come, and her father literally said, if we don't get her out of here to Abilene, I'm afraid we're going to lose the baby and her. So not words you want to hear.
Nope.
As your the woman you love and your firstborn is being there. So they were transported, we were transported, me in the ambulance with them, to Abilene. And this great doctor, Richard Stanley, I'll never forget his name, a very talented OBGYN, delivered Griffin and handed it to him. And the baby was perfect. I mean, he had been in the birth canal for all these many hours, and just the stress. And it just a pink and perfect baby, and I went, holy mackerel! I said, I expected him to be all bruised up and what have you. And Dr. Stanley looked at me and he said, "This isn't my first rodeo."
I'm going to say we are videoing this interview, and you telling that story, your face just lit up. You can see it in your face when I asked about your moment of joy. It's written all over your face.
When Sydney came along, and we were, we were blessed to have this second child, and anyway, those.
Then your old hands, less photographs, less worry.
I'm not sure, but she was certainly an easier to bring into the world, and
yes.
so.
And then harder for Dad, of course, to raise.
Well, as I told her, I said she's making up for it now. 25-year-old beautiful young lady, though. She's a real blessing, and they both are. So
sure.
we've had growing up and being the children of the governor of Texas is can't be easy. I mean, there's always people watching you. I remember Jenna and Barbara Bush, who were just great kids, and they don't choose their parents, and this gets kind of dumped on them.
Sure.
But I'm always greatly respectful of young men and women who grow up the children of either celebrities or political individuals, and mine have been very gracious, and I told them both when they got to be 21, I said, I'm so proud of you that you both made it to 21 without getting your picture on the front page of the paper in a way that would
excellent. Wonderful.
Embarrass you.
We're talking to Rick Perry, the governor of Texas. You can join first of all, let's specifically talk about Congress. You've made a point of saying you want to cut their pay in half, send them home. I don't think there's anyone within the sound of my voice that would have any kind of problem with that. But can the president actually do that?
I think you can be a catalyst for a number of things, and the two most important issues that face this country is obviously our economy and what Congress and the president have done to drive this country to the brink of bankruptcy from an economic standpoint. And the other is just the absolute loss of confidence in Washington, D.C. Whether you're just a private citizen, whether you're a mom or a dad whose child is serving somewhere in the military, and you hear them talking about cutting $500 billion out of an already too slimmed down budget for the military. And so the confidence factor in Washington is the other issue. And you can deal with both of those with a president who has the courage to go across this country and use the political capital that individual can have and build up to pass a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution, and at the same time a constitutional amendment that allows for demands and directs a part-time Congress, cut their salary, cut their staffs, send them home, let them have a regular job, and work and stay in their communities under the laws that they pass. Now, the reason that makes sense is because that's what most states do. For instance, I had the great privilege for the last 11 years of being the governor of the 13th largest economy in the world. And our legislature only meets for 140 days every other year. We pay our members of our legislature $600 a month. They come in, they get their work done. We are required by the Constitution to balance our budget, and then we go home. And they go home. Obviously, me being in the executive branch, which is a full-time position, but the legislators, and in this case it would be Congress, could operate the same way. A budget, they could 2-year budget cycle, and if the president saw an emergency or some issue, which we do from time to time, I mean, obviously, and it would work, and I think Americans would again begin to have more confidence that Washington's not spending all their time there, not taking care of the people's business, nor spending all of their money.
Yes. That all sounds great. And you say you could be a catalyst. The president could be a catalyst for this to happen. But at the end of the day, they've got to vote for it. And they never seem to be willing to vote for things that are not in their favor.
I think, well, actually, if they give some thought to this, I think they will find that it could be in their favor. And here's the reason why. Although they have very substantial salaries, I think it's $174,000, which is about 3 times what the average American family makes. There's nothing to say that they can't go home and have a private sector job that makes more money than that in some form or fashion. Absolutely. But I also look at it as a form of term limits, and don't pay them enough to where that it is a full-time job. And people will come, they'll do their service to the country, then they'll go back and work. Somebody wants to stay and they have the means of which to stay longer, fine. But at the end of the day, what we found in Texas, and I would bet even here in Iowa, is that these legislators, as a general rule, don't make this a full-time aspiration or vocation. It's an avocation, and I believe in it with all my heart that it can happen, and frankly, I think it should happen, because if we don't get confidence back in Washington, this country is going to continue to deteriorate and be corrosive with these relationships that are being developed there.
In another ad, you said you're going to open up the gas and the oil fields again, and once again, I've got to say to you, with the environmental lobby being as strong as it is, can the president actually achieve that? Actually,
you don't have to go through Congress for that one. So, I respect people's opinions that are in the activist environmental community, but the fact is this. We only produce about 8% of the proven reserves that we have in our federal lands and waters. Obviously, there are places we're not going to drill. The Everglades and Yellowstone Park, but we have, huge acreages of proven reserves that the administration refuses to allow us to produce on because they are kowtowing to these activist environmentalists. We need to make America more dependent, or I should say less dependent, on these hostile, in some cases, countries that are holding American hostage because we spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on foreign oil. We can move ourselves towards energy independence by opening up our federal lands, pulling back these regulations that are job killers. And again, none of that has to go through Congress. It all would depend on a president who has the courage and the forethought to have men and women who share, in my case, my philosophy, towards energy independence and the job creation. And that's the other side of this. It's twofold. Energy independence and obviously the security that comes with that and the jobs that get created. Okay. This XL pipeline is a great example of it, Simon, if I can talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
Because the president hiding behind I'm going to put this off until after the election. Another just, from my perspective, gross lack of leadership. You're either for this or you're against it. If you're against it, Mr. President, say, here's why I'm against it, and then let that be part of the dialogue during this election cycle. Mm-hmm. And if you're for it, which I am, let's get it done. It's 20,000 jobs. It's oil that in the Western Hemisphere that's coming out of Canada. They're going to not sit on that. They're going to sell it to someone. It's either going to go west to the Chinese or it's going to go south to America. I think it makes all the sense in the world. And we've got the question has been about the environmental impact that this oil line going across the Ogallala Aquifer in the Nebraska region somehow or another could be an environmental catastrophe. Mm-hmm. There are oil lines going across that already. This is going to be one of the safest pipelines built in history. So,
but this is what we're facing, though, because the president now, there's audio of him saying it. I could play it if I felt the urge. Is said that the jobs that are created by this pipeline are actually outweighed. He actually said unemployment benefit creates more jobs.
Wow.
Those words came out of his mouth. Now, considering the mainstream media hasn't taken him to task for this completely asinine comment, how big a task is it going to be for any Republican candidate to beat him next November? I mean, if you can't take a shot at the president for saying unemployment benefit is going to create more jobs than opening a pipeline.
Well, unemployment benefits are a disincentive for people to work. And I happen to think that Americans want to work. They want the dignity of having a job. And exposing this president for who he is, and that is in believing that these Keynesian theories of government will spend enough money, it will create jobs. Government cannot create jobs. It can either create an environment where jobs are created or an environment that is prohibited towards private sector entrepreneurs risking their capital and then creating the jobs that create the wealth. Those are the two things that government can do. And I don't know how many times we have to prove this. Frankly, it didn't work in the 30s. It didn't work any time that it's been used before. I would like to see John Maynard Keynes' theory of economics, if they're going to continue to even teach it, for it to be told in our economics classes that this is a theory that has been proven to not work.
There you go. We were just talking about oil and energy and independence, and I've got a caller on the line I'd like to bring on with us, and that is Bruce. Bruce, you are on the show with Governor Perry.
Thank you, Simon. And Governor Perry, thank you very much.
How are you, Bruce?
I certainly agree with what you've been talking about drilling in the U.S. and the pipeline across the U.S. I agree with both of those totally. But I would like to get your opinion on the ethanol industry. It's huge here in the state of Iowa, and 84,000 jobs plus. But the subsidies are going away, which we have, not we, the ethanol industry has supported. And I'll give you full disclosure. I work for a corn grower organization.
Okay.
Yeah, and
right, let's let the governor answer.
Let me just.
Thank you.
I'm an all of the above energy guy. It's not. I'm just because I'm from Texas doesn't mean I'm just oil and gas. And I'm for removing all of these tax credits and doing them at the same time. I know there are folks in the ethanol industry who are like, well, because it's in the tax code that the oil and gas industry get these tax credits. I'm for removing them all at the same time, phasing them out at the same time, so that all forms of energy, whether it's solar, wind, ethanol, any of the other alternative energy sources, oil and gas, nuclear, you name it, none of those get picked as winners or losers from the federal government. Now, if the state of Iowa wants to have a program of which they put a tax credit in place or an incentive in place to increase the use of ethanol in this state or the products that are done here. I am totally in favor of that because we actually did that in Texas on alternative fuels. We had a renewable portfolio piece of legislation that we gave incentives, and the wind energy folks saw that and took great advantage of it, and it's now the reason that we're the number one wind energy producing state. And as Terry Branstad tells me, Iowa's number 2, and be looking over your shoulder. We're going to try to pass you up. And that's the great kind of competition that the states need to be having.
It's not the federal government's role.
It's not the federal government's role to be picking winners and losers. And I would phase out all of those tax credits, not just for ethanol, but for the oil and gas industry, for wind, for solar, all of them.
Okay.
And then let the market figure it out. The market is the true place that needs to be decided.
Okay. You said, I just want to make sure we get all the topics because the clock's ticking incredibly fast here. You've said very clearly you're going to secure our borders within a year of taking office. And in fact, I think that's one of the main reasons that Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio has endorsed you. Now, I agree completely with that. But speaking as somebody who came in through the front door, clearly, that before we even try to reform immigration in this country, you've got to do that first. So I'm 100% in agreement with what you say regarding the border. Here's the question, though. What are you going to do after that? Well,
after you secure the border, and actually while that year is going on, and putting the boots on the ground and those aviation assets in place, you can secure the border. You can completely and absolutely shut the border down.
The border is secure.
And
now
then
what are you going to do? That's the
implement and carry through on all of the laws that are on the books today. Today, our federal government, and one of the ways, when I'm the President of the United States, you will not see me suing a state like Arizona that is implementing laws that they think are important in their state from the standpoint of immigration. We will not be suing them. As a matter of fact, we will be assisting them. And what you see happen in those states, this is early evidence that if we will just put those or enforce those laws that are on the books, a substantial number of individuals who are in this country illegally will leave and go back to their home countries. And then at that particular point in time, we can have a conversation about how do you deal with because nobody knows what the number of people are going to be. Is it going to be a large number? Is it going to be a small number? But let's do the work at hand and enforce the laws that we have on the books today, Simon. That will address a substantial number of these issues.
I'm sorry to talk over you.
No, it's all right.
Do you feel it's important that we make it easier for people to come into the country legally?
Depends on who they are. And I don't have a problem with making it easier for people who meet certain criteria that we may have and we may need. For instance, if it's highly technically trained individuals that are going into the technology industry and H-1B visas speed up the process to get them in, I think we talked about the idea of individuals who are over here on green cards to go to school, and they're in particular types of disciplines that are important for us to grow and to continue to lead the world in innovation, make it easier for them. If it's someone who comes in and says, listen, I want to join your military and serve and help defend this country, you may, so I think, yes, the answer is yes. And then we can have the discussion about, what are the parameters of which we would make it easier.
Having gone through it, I mean, I can tell you that it's at its most difficult in a government way, if you see what I mean. The bureaucracy is a nightmare.
Everything
and it
is
doesn't
more
make, and it doesn't
difficult
make sense
in a government way.
Well, of course. I mean, here's the classic.
It's part of the problem.
The classic example is you got to have a medical. Okay, make sure you've got nothing communicable. I'm completely in favor of that. It is a throwback to Ellis Island, but I'm completely in favor of that. I had been in this country 3.5 years before I received a medical to make sure I didn't have anything communicable.
That doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Not really, does it? Apart from to the doctor lobby who took $450 off me. So, I mean, so it's that kind of thing. Can we streamline it and get rid of some of the ridiculous bureaucracy that exists within this process?
And you just said the magic words that make most Americans really upset with Washington, D.C. in particular, and even state governments to some degree, and that is the ridiculous bureaucracy. There are 10 new regulations a day, according to a congressman that I visited with yesterday in Washington, D.C., as coming out of the EPA alone. 10 new regulations a day. Thousands of regulations that we have to deal with that aren't making our citizens safer, is not making our water cleaner, is not making our air cleaner, or water clearer, air cleaner. And it's the ridiculous regulations, Dodd-Frank banking regulation that's not going to, matter of fact, it's just put into statute, this corruption and fraud that we've seen between Washington and Wall Street. We just basically codified it into law.
We did.
So
I've got 2 minutes left, so I want to ask you a couple of quick fire questions. We were talking about energy. Will you make it easy for us to finally build a refinery?
Yes.
How long has it been? 30 years? 40 years?
Close to 30 years.
Unbelievable, isn't it? It's
well, and the XL pipeline is a great example of it. If it opens and it comes, there'll have to be new refineries built in the United States to deal with that. Some of them may be up in the North Dakota area where the Bakken Shale is, and some of them will be further south where that XL pipeline, those tar sands go.
Okay, you've had some issues in debates. Everybody knows it. You're happy to talk about it. In fact, the last one, where you lost an agency, I thought was a very human moment myself. But if you were to become the GOP nominee, should the thought of you facing the president give those who want a Republican to take that office, should it give them cause for concern?
Not really. I am quite comfortable that I'm going to be talking about this president's total lack of leadership, his loss of 3.5 million jobs, or however many millions of jobs we've lost. I mean, his vision for America to turn it into Europe is becoming a reality. And I don't think Americans want to be Europe. They want to be uniquely American. And
warn about it every day.
So I look forward to – and listen, if Americans are looking for the slickest debater, don't vote for me. I'm not it. We've already got that person, and he's sitting in the White House, and it hadn't worked out very well for us.
Absolutely, and we all understand that. But the one thing that he is great at doing is running for office.
Right.
He's not great when he gets there, but running for office is fantastic, and he's going to have $1 billion to spend. Should we not be scared of that?
We should be concerned, sure. I mean, it's one of the reasons that Americans need to realize that this is about the future of this country. But I've been elected 3 times to the second largest state in the nation, and a couple of 3 times before that statewide. And my ability to run a campaign, I am quite comfortable with. And this is going to be a campaign about the future of America. And we saw and heard hope and change. There were a lot of Americans that said, you know what, let's give this guy a chance. We have given him a chance, and he has been an abject failure.